All right. Hola, Alpha Familia. Thank you so much for taking the time to join with us tonight. It's such a pleasure to be with you here, with all of you here today. My name is Chris Ramos. I'm a senior policy analyst for Vanguard for its regulatory affairs team here in Washington, D.C. Just a brief overview of Vanguard. It's a global leader in the asset management industry. In 1975, we set out under a truly unique ownership structure to change the world of investing. Our company is owned by our funds, which in turn are owned by our fund shareholders. And with no other outside shareholders, Vanguard's interests are squarely aligned with meeting the investment needs of our clients. Here at Vanguard, you're more than just an investor, you're an owner, which sounds pretty dope to me. So I think it's a great segue to our event here this evening. I'm pleased to moderate a conversation between Susie Gallagher, Lynette Duenas, and Melissa Montoya, some incredible Latina crew members here at Vanguard. And we'll talk through owning your seat at the table. Before we get started, just a quick housekeeping item. We will be answering live Q&A in the last 15 minutes of the conversation, so please feel free to ask any and all questions during that time. But I think we will go ahead and get started with, with introductions. Sorry, my bad. I should have introduced y'all. So we'll start off with Susie. So Susie joined Vanguard in 2013 through the MBA Leadership Development Program. She's had multiple project and people leadership roles across several divisions in Vanguard, and she currently heads the advisor support groups and personal advisor services, or PAS. Susie holds a BA from the University of California, San Diego. That's a great, beautiful location to go to college. And then an MBA from Arizona State University, so go Sun Devils. And then outside of work, she loves to spend time with family, traveling, exploring wines from all around the world, and then geeking out on politics, economics, and history. You and I are on the same page, Susie. So yeah, we have a lot to talk about offline. Next up is Lynette Duenas. And fun fact, Lynette and Susie actually came into Vanguard through the same MBA development program cohort in 2013. Lynette has also held several roles at Vanguard and is currently serving as a senior transformation consultant, supporting a division with modern work practices and behaviors such as lean, agile, and servant leadership. She earned a Bachelor of Science from the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania, and an MBA from Cornell. And then last but not least, we have Melissa Montoya. She's a full service relationship manager in Vanguard's institutional investor group. She serves as a strategic partner to retirement plan sponsors, assisting them through the needs, through the alignments of their needs to solutions. In her 8 years at Vanguard, Melissa's had several roles across several divisions and earned her bachelor's degree in finance and psychology from the University of Arizona, and was born and raised in Bogota, Colombia, speaks Spanish fluently, and considers Arizona her home away from home. She is also a mom of a 1-year-old. We were connecting about this yesterday because I'm also the dad of a 1-year-old as well, and has 2 Australian Shepherds, which is awesome. So those are our panelists for this evening, and we will, I guess, get started with questions. So the first question that we have is to everyone, and that's the theme for Alpha's live episode is owning your seat at the table. So when you were first approached about participating on this panel, what were your immediate reactions as to what this theme, owning your seat at the table, what that mean to y'all? So feel free to chime in, anyone.
I can start. So I actually immediately thought of my current role as a relationship manager. When I started this role, I was in a group of 20 of us, and only 3 of us were women, and I was the only woman of color in a group of 20 of us. So I felt that, and I thought, what does this mean for me? And I thought, this means I need to step up and represent myself and represent those who I can represent, and then be able to bring more women up into this role, be able to bring more diversity into this role. And I've been in my current role for 2 years, and I definitely spoke up when I didn't feel comfortable. I spoke up when I felt imposter syndrome. And I'm so happy to say there are many more women in the role. There's actually another Colombian girl who got hired into the relationship manager role this week. So it just to me, it made me think, like, I'm at this table. What am I going to do with the voice that I have?
So when I was first asked to join the panel, this is probably not good, but why we need to speak about it, I thought, well, who's going to want to hear from me? Goodness, why are they asking me? I thought, no, get out of your head. I have a ton of experience. I've gone through a lot to get to where I am. And I think that, just similar to Melissa, yeah, I belong here. Melissa belongs here. Lynette belongs here. And if it helps that, the 3 of us are talking to this wide group to tell you, trust me, you belong as much as anybody else. Like, it's definitely worth it. And so I had that immediate, like, why would they want to hear from me? And I think that's something that a lot of us work through and get better at over time, through forums like this. So that was my initial reaction.
Yeah. So I agree with both of you. The only thing I'll add is I thought of the things that I learned later in my career. So it isn't all up to fate, and hard work and keep your head down and you'll be noticed. Like, that's what I grew up hearing. Like, just work hard and it'll all work out. Maybe it does, and that's, if you're lucky, but generally you actually have to own where your career is going to go. And so we'll talk a lot more about that as the conversation goes, but you actually have to play an active role. So that's what I thought about when I heard of the topic.
Thank you all. Melissa, imposter syndrome definitely resonates. I remember going to Dartmouth, and I remember joking around saying, hey, are you sure you got the right Chris Ramos? Like, am I supposed to be here? And the admissions officer was like, yes, we got the right Chris Ramos. Like, we don't admit people who don't deserve to be here. So it's good to see that you found your voice, you have that seat at the table, and that hopefully that imposter syndrome is being mitigated day after day. Our second question, I'm going to actually pose to Susie. So this past March, Vanguard celebrated Women's History Month with our theme of Break the Bias. And the mission behind this year's theme was to demystify and confront one major bias against women in corporate environments across all industries. And that's the gap between women and men being perceived as strategic thinkers. So Susie, as the head of personal advisor services support, how have you built your strategic thinking muscles over time?
Well, first, it's sad that that's a perception, because I thought about this, like, what does that even mean to be strategic, and why on earth would you think that this huge population of people don't have it, or men have it more than women? And what came to my mind first was, do you even know what it means to be strategic? And the reason I like, do people actually know when they see it? Do they know what they're seeing? And I think this plays into this really false perception that maybe you hear somebody say something with such confidence in your mind, it's like, oh, they must be a strategic thinker. Or things like, oh, well, they use data. They must be a strategic thinker. You know, there are a lot of differences too in the types of roles that people have, and there's some industries or roles where it's swayed very heavily. I'm in financial services. Our advisors are mostly men. The vast majority are men, and there's a big push. Let's get women in here. And you think, okay, finance, it's mostly men. Oh, men must be more strategic than women. And I think that's where a lot of these perceptions come from. And I would love to speak to somebody, you know, if that is someone's perception, that, yeah, it's not based on gender. And so what does it mean to be strategic? And I think at a high level, it's, right, you have an end goal, you have a long-term end goal, the strategy, the strategy.
I like it. I like it.
Strategy, right, is how you get there. And it's creating your plan, but it's a lot of things along the way. And this is what I've worked through sort of in my career to really think strategically. And that's, yes, I have an end goal, and yes, I can draw out a plan and a pretty little PowerPoint, but what happens in real life? Right? You don't know what happens in real life. And so the strategic part comes in, and these are the muscles you flex. And I think that is your question, Chris, is asking those questions all along the way with your plan. It's that what if analysis. What if this happens? Right? It's, what are you basing this on? So you want to plan A, B, and C, and that's your sequence. Well, what's B based on? What can go wrong? I know our risk-minded people, this is the question they ask every day. So what can go wrong, and how do you mitigate that? And so, like, implanting these questions in what you're doing with your teams, you know, and your own projects are really important. And it is a muscle that you flex. It does take practice. The one that I also feel strongly about, like as a leader, working with my team, is creating that environment where people speak up. It's think out loud. Like, think out loud. Tell me what's going through your mind. Why did you ask that question? Right? So, like, actually this happened today in a team meeting where, you know, somebody asked a question, well, can we wait until, you know, 2 weeks from now to do this? And I said, well, no. Then I stopped myself and I said, no, wait. Why are you asking that question? Tell me your thought process. That's all strategy. What is that thought process there? And it turns out that there was something that, you know, there was something that made us change direction, but allowing people to ask questions, right? So, because, you know, there's a lot of hesitation, and I hesitated a lot early on in my career to ask a question. Oh my gosh, are people going to think I'm dumb? And it's, go for it. Ask the question. And if you do get a reaction, you take a step back. Here was my thought process, right? That's the strategic thinking. And making it safe for people to do that. Make it safe for someone to ask a question. Stop. Why do you ask that? What, you know, think out loud. Tell me your thought process here. Those are the little things that, yes, they do take practice, but those are the little things that get you to your end goal. It's, right, that strategy.
Yep. I could not agree more. The best leaders that I've had are the ones who establish a psychological safety for you to ask those questions. And so I'm glad that you are doing that for your crew. And that'll encourage, I think, more questions, and then it ends up becoming a better product or accomplishing your goal. My next question is going to be to Melissa. Earlier this month, you celebrated your daughter's first birthday. So happy birthday to your daughter. Also, what is your daughter's name, by the way?
Camila is my daughter's name.
Camila.
What's your son's name?
Gael.
Gael.
Is there any like backstory or history
Oh my
as
gosh.
to why y'all picked Camila?
I got this question today, and somebody asked me, like, what does Camila mean? I do not know. We picked it as a name that we liked. It was
Yeah.
pretty. There's no like family connection, so I'll have to take that back. I have no idea.
That's okay. It's a beautiful name. I was just curious. So this past year, you found yourself kind of in a unique position where you had to wear 3 hats in a day. You had your role as a relationship manager. You're part of the leadership team for our crew resource group or employee resource group outside of Vanguard called HOLA, which is the Hispanic LatinX organization for leadership and advancement, of which we are all members of here. And then you also had to wear the hat of a new mother. How did your experience in any of these 3 areas help you own your seat?
The first thing that comes to mind for me is, as a new mom, trying to get sleep and taking my daughter to doctor's appointments pretty endlessly. I was just telling the group that my daughter got ear tubes a couple of weeks ago after many ear infections. It made me realize that, man, we're all just people trying to live our lives. I do not need to be this robot with my clients. I work with a lot of, top executives at outside companies. And it made me realize how important it is to show my vulnerabilities and not have to prove myself that I am smart, I work hard. I also have a sick daughter that, hasn't allowed me to sleep very well, and I'm tired today, and that is okay. It's okay to share those things with our coworkers, our clients, because I'm sure there's relatability there. So that has really made me feel like I can be very much myself. We always talk about like bring your real self to work, but it really has paid off dividends from my perspective in that sense. And then when I connect my leadership role in our Latinx community at Vanguard with my role and being a mom, I think of it as, man, I see the value. It's like weird for me to say because I was actually just talking today how self-deprecating I can be, but I see the value that I can bring to the table that I'm sitting at with a lot of men, with my background, with my experience as somebody who wasn't born here, as my experience as a woman. And I feel the value it brings to the team. And I know that others who are not represented can do that as well. So with being a part of the leadership team in OLA, I can help with leadership development so that I can get those, help those people who have ambition to get to these type of roles, get here and be represented and add value. And so, I have 8 years of experience at Vanguard. Some may say that's not a lot. Some may say that's a lot. But I have seen the value of others who have brought me up and felt like they believed in me and believed that I could bring value. And I want to do that for others. And that's how I feel like I'm owning my seat at this table. And ultimately, I would want the same thing to be done with my daughter, somebody to believe in her and to, feel like she brings something to the table that is not represented at that time.
Love it. I think there was a question in the chat. I'm just going to Felicia Gasparo said, my little one as well has tubes and surgery. Chris, I love your son's name. How do you spell it? It's spelled Gael, but pronounced Gael. We got a lot of folks who say Gail, but
What does it mean, Chris?
so if my understanding is correct, which I understand Spanish, but I can't speak it all that well, unfortunately. But we wanted, our intention was, my wife is Irish, and so we wanted to name him Gael as a homage to her side of the family. And so Gael, I think, means a Gaelic person. That's why we named him that way. That's the official story. The unofficial story is that we were thinking about Javier as a name, and then Meg wanted to, for like the nickname to be Javi with an I, and I was like, no Puerto Rican I know is spelled Javi with an I, like it's a Y, and I was like, this is a bridge too far, and so so we compromised, and Gael ended up being the name. So, but he looks like a Gael for sure. So. My next question goes to you, Lynette. It's not uncommon to meet a crew member, which is what we call employees here at Vanguard, who had a previous life with another employer or even in another industry. You joined Vanguard through our MBA development program, which you came with a wealth of knowledge before joining that MBA development program. And so with that said, what role did Vanguard play in your development going through the MBA development program, and allowed you, or in allowing you the opportunity to like gain exposure, build that confidence needed for your seat at the table?
Yeah, thanks. So prior to Vanguard, I worked at a few financial services companies in New York, and I experienced the recession, and I actually saw some of what you shouldn't do in leading a company or leading a team. So that's actually what propelled me to go back to school and pursue a career at a company that's trying to do better. So being part of a program where you come in and within 6 months of each rotation, you're expected to deliver on a business problem or business problems that you were given, definitely challenged my assumptions from the past, working experiences, and challenged me in a variety of ways. So first on the assumptions, so I just mentioned earlier the whole like just work hard, keep your head down, like you'll be noticed. Well, coming into Vanguard, I learned about socialization and how important it is to share your thoughts with others, your work, not to show off, but rather to gather the perspectives of stakeholders so that in your recommendations, you've actually been exposed to potential objections, potential tailwinds, what options have been considered in the past, so that you can actually leverage them in your recommendations and be more confident when you're presenting out. And then secondly, between formal training as a cadre or cohort, that all come in together, learning from each other's rotation. So back then when we came in, and Susie remembers this really clearly, we would actually read out on our rotations. And so not only did we have formal training at the beginning of every rotation that we spent the week together, learning a variety of things, learning from various leaders that would come in and talk about different areas of the business, but we also then learned from each other. And so you learn how big and small Vanguard is because there's so many interconnections. There's so many challenges that are happening in one area where you can say, hey, this happened over here. Like, let me leverage this, but customize this to help this part of the organization. And so it also helped me to learn that you can build a very solid career here, whether you want to actually pursue one particular domain, which is like an area of focus, right? It could be like legal, sales, etc. Or you can actually be really general management focused. And so at this point, when you think about, like I started out, I did the rotation, started out in an operations role, went into client services, supporting our clients internationally. And now I'm like a modern work practices coach, helping a sales organization optimize how they provide the right products to the clients at the right time. And I'm still here and still being challenged. And so in addition to like those formal pieces, I would say other mentors and being honest with your leaders has really helped me. Like I can go into this example more in depth later, but I would say to the point of owning your seat in your table at the table, and taking an active role. It's really talking about what you want. And so again, going back to the keep your head down and it'll come to you. No, you need to say like, I actually am aspiring to be this. And I have these experiences. These are my strengths. Acknowledging your areas of opportunity or even places where you've had some struggle, because to the point of Susie, like being a great leader here and trying to advocate for, or I should say, building an environment of psych safety with her team, like that's fantastic. My leader is wonderful like that. I should say like my past few leaders have been like that. And so it really allows for you to have an honest conversation of where you want to be. So that can actually mean, hey, you're not ready yet, but let's talk about how we can get you there. Or actually, there is this really great opportunity over here that I think you should go for. So, all that together, I think the experience now over the last almost 9 years at Vanguard has really, continued to challenge me, but keeps me confident in my ability to really own the direction of my career.
And one of the things that you had mentioned about, kind of owning your career and asking, right? It brings up to mind a mentor of mine. She always told me, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So you have to have that conversation with your leader and be, frank of like what your needs are, what you're looking to accomplish, et cetera. So, yeah. This question, we kind of touched on earlier a little bit in terms of the phrase of imposter syndrome. And that's gained momentum, I think, over the past few years. And this isn't something new that the LatinX community has had to face. Can we go more in depth into where each of you have felt imposter syndrome? What helped you overcome that imposter syndrome as you owned your seat at that table?
Do you mind if I jump in, since
go.
So like Susie and Melissa gave some initial examples. So the one that really came to mind with this, when you mentioned this question is, well, actually, there's been a little bit of that in every role. Right? You're always, I think, given that I've rotated through different divisions at this point, it's like each new role gives you the jitters of like, everyone else knows more than I do. But the big one was when I launched out of the program, I launched to lead a large organization of 6 team leaders and almost 100 crew and contractors. And many of these people had been at the company for decades. So I immediately thought, like, who am I? Same thing as Susie, right? Who am I to be leading this group of experts who have been here for decades? What am I supposed to do? But what I loved was I connected with one of my previous rotational managers who encouraged me to go for this role. And she actually offered to like talk about like, how are you going to approach, jumping into conversations with your team leaders. And part of what we discussed though was for me to do what I had done successfully in the rotation under her, where it was listen to the problems that were going on and facilitate their solutions. Right? Like I know I'm very like oversimplifying that, but I didn't have to be the expert. I wasn't hired to be the expert. I had to help lead the team in a new direction. And the organization needed someone to drive consistency and accountability with authentic like care and trust for folks. And so that was what I could bring. That was what I brought to the rotation. That was why they wanted me in this role. And that's what pointed to, like, honestly, a metric, right? We always look at what are the metrics of success. And like the engagement as how we measure it tripled in 2 years in that organization. And so it really taught me, like, you need to lean into your strengths and be confident in what you bring, right? What are I have a tool of like I did that. So whenever you're feeling low, particularly down about like or having a bad day, like go into your arsenal. Like anytime you do something great at work, keep a separate note, whether it's handwritten. I don't know if you prefer using a phone, right, or using your computer, but like keep a document that talks about all your successes, not just for mid-year and year-end evaluations, but honestly for you to pump yourself up, because it's very easy to get dissuaded at times. And so when you look back at this document, you're like, you know what? That was like I did that. And so I think all of those now, you have a couple of different examples, like Susie was alluding to, like you have to work that muscle, you need to continue to build upon it. So now there's, a bunch of other examples where, yes, you still have a little bit of imposter syndrome, but if you've experienced it already, I think you can mentally work on like, uh-oh, that thought is sneaking in. Like, how do I counteract the negative thoughts? And also, how do you leverage people in your network to help you get up to speed quickly, to help you with the pieces that you feel, less than confident on? Like if you're joining a new division, before that, I'm like, hey, tell me about like, what are your key metrics this year? What are the things that you're after? What are your goals? So that you don't come in fully blind.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a little red book that has my badass list of accomplishments
There you go.
that I read through. I'm like, oh yeah, I did that. And then I think you always have like kind of members of your, what I call like members of your board.
Board
like
of directors.
Yeah, there we go. Your board of directors. And I know who I need to call to like kind of pump me up, be my cheerleader.
Yeah.
I always love serving as other people's cheerleaders. I always tell people, number one fan of you has to be you. Number two fan, maybe your parents, your spouse, and number three fan is Chris Ramos. So yeah, anytime you need a pump up session, I'm here.
Awesome.
Melissa, Susie, please feel free to chime in on the question on imposter syndrome.
Sure. So this one's this was early on when we, like Lynette and I had joined this rotational program, and it's like sort of topic specific. So the way our program worked is they branched us off into sort of like the general management track and the investment management track. And I came as general management. And I remember thinking like, oh, I could never do the investment track. Like, oh, that is like way out of my league. And oh, these guys must be guys too, right? It was mostly guys. Way out of my league. And I remember like sitting down one day, because we would all share our work with each other, and one of them had created this model, credit research. I don't remember the topic, but he was showing me the model, and he was showing me everything he built, the little algorithm, and I was following, and it was very straightforward. It's very clear to me. And he kept saying, "Are you sure? Like you understand this?" And in my head, I thought, well, yeah, it's not that. I mean, it's kind of basic, right? And I think that like that moment, I think was one of those moments where I was like, oh my God, it's not, it's not out of my league. And I said earlier, like, trust me, you belong at that table. I think a lot of us go through this. What they do must be so complicated. Like the investment portfolio manager guys, like, oh, I could never do that. And I think once I started getting a lens into it and they were explaining it to me, and yeah, a little condescending that he was like checking to make sure I got it, but I was like, oh, wait, no, not only did I get it, it was kind of like easy to understand. And so it's like, okay, you guys want me to think that you're like so much smarter or whatever. But I remember that. And along the way, you have those moments, and it's not that you're not smart enough or you don't belong at that table. It's just a known. You just haven't learned it yet. You're more than capable of it. So I remember that moment very clearly.
I'll chime in real quick with something I thought about when I heard this question, which was something I've never felt imposter syndrome about, is being a mom. And I don't know if it's because society tells me, especially like the Latin society tells me, like, you as a Latin woman are meant to be a mom and stay-at-home mom. Or I don't know if it's because I've just always felt like very matronly and I've had younger brothers. But that's really something I hear about that, mothers experience imposter syndrome about. And I really never have. And it's just making me think, like, is this society? Is it me? But one small example at Vanguard where I did feel it was in my first committee meeting where I had to meet with the trustees of the plan, which is like the CEO, CFO, the head of HR, and it's my first time running a meeting, giving them an update on their retirement plan. And I mean, I felt like I did not know what I was talking about. I felt like I did not belong at this table. And it just, with conversations prior to this meeting with my boss, he said, just lean into your strengths, ask questions, get to know them, get to understand what's important to them. In their first meeting with you, they're not expecting you to be this deep expert on their plan and answer all of their very my questions that are very specific. Like, just be yourself, come across as caring, ask good questions, and it'll be great. It was a great meeting. I uncovered a lot that hadn't been uncovered before, and it just helped a lot to remind myself, like, even when I'm feeling this way, what are my strengths? How can I lean in and, have some confidence.
Awesome. Susie, sorry, my boss is waving. He's leaving for the night. Susie, one thing that you brought up was like kind of those moments where imposter syndrome hits. And I vividly remember like the first moment where I had imposter syndrome, and I had just gotten accepted into Virginia Tech, which is my undergrad alma mater. And was telling people like, hey, like I'm going to Virginia Tech, very excited. And I remember one guy just like out of nowhere just said, oh yeah, you probably got in because you're brown. And I like, even if it was a joke, and I think, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, or backhanded compliment, whatever, however you want to, phrase it. But that was like the exact moment where I was like, oh shit, like, do I deserve to be here? Like, did I take a spot away? And that set me back like almost a decade until like that moment at Dartmouth when I was like, oh, no, I actually deserve to be at this table. So going into, because we're coming up on almost 5:45, and then want to transition into the live Q&A portion of our segment. The last question for all of you: knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to your younger self to help navigate the journey of owning your seat at the table?
I'll kind of circle back to my last answer around the confidence piece. I ride with Peloton. I take Peloton classes on my bike, and there's this instructor. Her name is Ali Love, and in one of the classes I took, she said, a lot of people say, what advice would you give to your, younger self? But I say, like, let me celebrate my older self. Like, she got me here, and I felt like that was pretty powerful. She is the one I should be thanking for where I'm at right now. But I think, back to my comment earlier today about being self-deprecating, I would like to give myself this advice now and to my younger self. I want to be confident in my abilities with the idea that I have a lot of growth to make, and know that I have something to give right now, and that I will continue learning the rest of my life. So I guess, yeah, just be confident in your current abilities at whatever stage of my previous self I'm giving this advice to.
I love that, Melissa. I mean, I'm thinking a lot about what Susie said of like the yet. Like, if we can always anchor on the yet, like, I don't know that yet, right? Like, well, I'll get back to you with that, because it doesn't have to be binary of I don't know that, and that means I'm terrible, right? So kind of going off of what you were saying, like, I would say two things. So I actually agree. Like, I think I had a nice time. My younger self had a nice time. I traveled a lot, did a lot before moving to the suburbs of Pennsylvania, and I still travel, but you know what I mean. So I would take like more risks right out of college, where like I went home. I went back to New York City because in my mind I was like, well, it's New York. Like, why wouldn't I go back? But there were, as I learned through business school, like later in life, obviously, I was like, wow, there's a lot of great companies out there, and they're all in different parts of the company and the country, like Vanguard, right? There's different locations in the country. And then the other one is listen less to your negative thoughts. So I have a whiteboard over here to the left of my desk, and the top thing says our thoughts are not true unless we want them to be. So I was just talking a little bit earlier around that, like a negative thought comes in, like how do you grab it and counteract it with something positive? Because sometimes we are our worst enemies. We're the ones that don't let ourselves grow. Women in general, right? Like they'll look at a job description and they'll be like, oh, I only have 9 out of 10 things. I can't apply. And meanwhile, like I'm going to use a general, like guys, right? We'll look at it and be like, I've got 3. It's okay. I'm applying. And so like we should take a little bit more of that. Now, again, a general topic, because I know that there's guys that aren't, but you know, it's like we need more women to feel more like that, where they can say like, hey, I've got 5 things or I've got 9 things. Like I'm going to apply for that role. And to the earlier point of like asking, right? Like being able to have that position and say, I might not have this, but I've got these things. So those are the 2 things that I'll anchor on.
So there is one thing that came to mind on this topic, and it was the very unhealthy competitiveness that I would like get myself into, and comparing yourself to someone you think is on a similar level as you, and seeing the divergence in your experiences. And they got promoted, and you just get it was actually quite toxic. Well, but I'm just as good. Why are they getting promoted before me? Or like, well, why didn't I get that rotation? And that I think just breeds that negativity. What I've learned over time, and especially when I became a mom 4 years ago, like looking back, it's like, wow, that didn't even matter. Everybody's journey is going to be different. Timing is going to be different. And this is something that, I like to tell people young, early in their careers, they want to go for this promotion. And I tell them, sometimes you're not going to get that promotion. And it's not because you're not capable or somebody doesn't think you're smart. There's a lot more going on in this corporate world where the timing just wasn't right. And so, when things didn't go my way, it was like, oh, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? And sometimes it's not that. Just timing is going to be different for everybody. So advice to my old self. And it's hard because when you're in that moment, it's hard to get your head out of these negative thoughts. So I wish I didn't care as much, because I care a lot less now, and it's so much healthier. Like I enjoy what I do so much without worrying about what so-and-so is doing, or, so that's advice to my old self.
I love it. So I'm hearing the themes of, kind of love yourself, like love the person who you are now, because that's the person who got you to where you are. And as the great RuPaul has said many times over, and I love RuPaul's Drag Race, one of my favorite shows. If you can't love yourself, how the hell can you love anyone else? So I love living by that motto. Lynette, you're talking about, being confident in your abilities, asking for things, be confident that you may not know yet, but you can acquire that knowledge. And I am definitely one where I look at a job description and I was like, oh yeah, I got 2 out of 10, done. Let's go apply. It's like, what's the worst they could say? No, like, okay, cool. Yeah. Like, keep it moving. So I wholeheartedly agree with you. You gotta just have that approach of like, if you have 1 or 2 of those things, yeah, go for it. Because you could probably learn everything else that you need to learn in that job. And then lastly, Susie, you were talking about, timing and running your own race. And that's, I always have to keep reminding myself when I start comparing, oh, where do I think I should have been at this point in my life? I run my own race. I'm exactly where I need to be right now. So yeah, very awesome answers. Thank you all for sharing that. and sharing your stories with our Alpha Familia. That's going to close our fireside chat portion of this segment. We do have some questions from our listeners. We have two, so I'll start with the first one. How have y'all had to deal with roadblocks for which you have no control over? And this is a question to all of the panelists.
I thought of something that happened in my previous role. I was a leader over an operations team. It was my first experience working in operations. I realized pretty quickly within the first year that it wasn't going to be a long-term career for me. And I talked to my leader about this and told him that I am interested in getting closer to the client and being in a more like client-centric. I want to be in front of the client. And he said it's too soon. Here at Vanguard, we have what we call time and job, where we have to be in a job for 18 months before we can go to the next, another job. And he essentially said no. And it definitely was a roadblock. I had no control over it because I either had to get his blessing to move on, or that was really my only option. So then, I just kind of took the challenge at hand and said, I am going for the next, 6 months. I'm going to kill it at this job, and I'm going to just, make the most out of it and learn the most I can in the next 6 months, and then be as prepared as I can be, do all the research I can within the next 6 months to be ready for my next step. It was pretty devastating. I was bummed out that I didn't get my leader support. But it's okay, that my career didn't end there, and I learned a ton in those 6 months. So it was ultimately, now looking back, I could say like it was for the better, but back then I was pretty pissed off. And I learned a lot by just taking a step back. No control over this situation. So what am I going to do with the situation that I have at hand?
I think something that comes up in my job quite a bit. Okay, I want something done. I have no control. So the decision is somewhere else. First of all, who has control? Like, who has control? But like what I have to like really challenge myself to do is like take a step back. Why do you want this? Like if I'm willing to go to this decision maker, whoever has control, to influence and convince, I have to take a step back and be as objective as possible. Am I doing this for selfish reasons? Am I doing this because it is the right thing to do? And if it's the right thing to do, go back to those questions from the strategy question, right? Okay, what is this based on? Experiences, data, research? And so sort of separate the feelings from, right, the more, I guess, objective criteria as to why you want. And more often than not, if it is the right thing and it's based on something truly substantive, you will influence. You do have that influence because people are, for the most part, not just being jerks about it, right? They will listen to reason. So that is something that I run into, and it's hard. Like, take a step back. Why do you want this? And go from there.
So the first thing that came to mind, honestly, was my first leader out of the program. So I already told you about that, like what that was, big role and everything. But my leader and I butt heads a lot. And to the point where year end, it's like I felt like I didn't get recognition for like the work that I really had done for the organization. So you might think there like you have no control over it. right? But what I decided to do was like work around this person. Because I was working with other business partners and other peers of his, like how do I help them speak on my behalf so that he can see that value? And so if he, for some reason, let's just use calibration, which is a process generally going into year ends or mid years, where they're talking and he might go like, Lynette's not doing that great. I'm saying, right? They might go, you're wrong. Because that's the whole process. They might say like, give us more data, give us more information because here's all the value she's bringing to the table. And so that was my approach after feeling like, really surprised of like, how do you not see what I'm doing? So let me help work around you, because sometimes it does feel like that one person isn't going to relinquish that control. So how do you help influence, maybe not one-on-one, but using other people? So I don't know if that applies to a lot of other examples, but like perhaps, right, working around the situation and seeing what other ways you can influence it.
Lynette, I think that's actually a great segue to the next question. And I think probably for time purposes, our last one for everyone. Have you ever had to manage up to ensure that you are owning your seat at the table? And if so, any tips or advice on how to do so?
So, go ahead.
Sorry, lost my phone there.
No, I mean, you know what? I'll give a quick one. So having that experience with that previous leader, we ended up getting new leaders, right? To not get into too many details, but when that new leader came in, because I now had like, you can call it the drama of like the previous few years, I went into this relationship like, how do you like to be communicated to? What do you need, right? Like, how do you, what are your expectations? Like, how, like, what do you want out of this role? What do you want out of the team? Just like trying to really get really good questions so that I'm not sitting there again, like heads down, right? Work hard and you'll be noticed. No, like, what do you need so that I can make sure I give it to you? And in the right way that you want it too, because there are some leaders that might be like, text me, not text me a proposal, but you know what I mean? Like text me, versus someone else might be like, no, I need a phone call or I need, an email. Something as simple as that. And so it's really like, first of all, it's level setting, right, on that relationship. And then I would say, if you're encountering some other issues, like probably leveraging some of what we said, but managing up, a lot of it is making sure you're clear on the expectations that are expected, and then how are you delivering on those. And now obviously if the expectations change in some way or you need them to change, then that's where you have to bring information. I think Susie was talking about it, like data, research, like bring the points that help you to influence the why does this have to change. And I would say like that would help in terms of either it's trying to solve a problem and trying to change the direction of a strategy, or trying to own like why you believe you should be moving on to a particular role or be allowed to apply to a role or something like that, right? Like I think that can apply to a variety of areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in that situation I spoke about earlier, I put together a one-pager saying like, here's my skill set, here's why I feel ready for it, here's all the value I've brought to the department. And that was just a step of many that I had to take. And I still, had to have the 18 months of tenure in the role. But I really liked what you said, Lynette, where bring up the points of, of successes that you've had in the role and put it in front of your leader. I think managing up, you will always have to manage up if you're working in a big corporation like this, if you're working for someone else, which we all do. And so I've tapped into a couple of my peers who I know do a really good job, who've gotten like what we call distinguished in their role, which is the highest rating that you can get. And I say, how do you show your value to your leader? Like, what is it that you do? And it really does come to like tracking the areas, understanding what your expectations are, back to Lynette's point, and then tracking based on those expectations, what are the, areas where you've met those expectations, exceeded those expectations? How do you go above and beyond and really show that to your leader any like time it gets close to calibration or on a consistent basis, whether it's monthly, quarterly, whatever it is?
I think I'll take a slightly different angle on this, managing up. And yeah, like Melissa said, you're going to be managing up. But in interaction, sort of, you know, I think that people want everyone to be genuine. We talked about the psychological safety. And so I've been in rooms with a super, super senior leader, right? And they say something, and then they say to the group, well, what do you guys think? And what does everyone do? Oh, great, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think, like, as a leader myself, I don't want that. I don't want to be the emperor's new clothes. Like, I wouldn't want that. I want people to be genuine and straightforward. And I don't want anyone, again, to like be a jerk or anything, but I think that's really important in sort of gaining that respect and that credibility as a professional, is the ability to say something, even if it is that, you know, super higher senior person, even if it is something you think they may not want to hear. But I think that does build the credibility and the respect as a business leader.
It's a good one.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I just moved into this role about a month or month and a half ago, and probably like week 2, the head of the DC office, he was making a point, and I just said, sir, just to push back on that. And like his eyes were like, oh my gosh, finally somebody actually like is saying something that he disagrees with me. And I was like, yeah, like, and this is why. And he was like, oh, like, I didn't think about it that way. Thank you. Like, so couldn't agree more. I do think I think that is a trait that leaders are looking for. And one way you can definitely manage up is respectfully, tactfully disagreeing or putting in another viewpoint that they may not be considering. You will get a lot of, I think, credibility in that regard. So I definitely appreciate that, Susie. And then Melissa, I think you're absolutely right. Lynette, same thing. Like, you got to showcase your accomplishments. Like, you got to toot your own horn, like toot toot, throw a parade a little bit, so that way people notice the value that you're bringing to the table, because they won't. And it's just, life. It kind of, things are happening so fast that sometimes leaders are not recognizing that. And so you got to kind of, my mother-in-law will always tell me, like, self-praise is no praise, but I respond to her. I'm like, Nancy, sometimes self-praise is the only praise you can do, like, yeah. Especially in a work environment. Yeah, exactly. So just want to thank all of you so much for your stories, for being vulnerable, for sharing with the Alpha Familia your experiences at Vanguard, your personal stories, etc. I really appreciate it, Susie, Lynette, Melissa. We're so lucky to have you as part of the Vanguard crew. Before I wrap up, just want to also thank our audience. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for the questions. We really appreciate it. And just as a FYI, last housekeeping items, you will see our LinkedIn profiles. Feel free to connect with all of us. Happy to answer any questions. Also, I have to do a plug for Vanguard, because like we're having this session. So please, like, feel free to go to our career page, vanguardjobs.com. Follow us on LinkedIn to stay in the know of any upcoming opportunities. We would love to have you join us join the crew. And thank you again so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.